Yeah, thank you for being here, Dr. Nashwa. It's really an honor to have you in the forum today. And uh, I would like to introduce Dr. Nashwa. Dr. Nashwa Yamani is an associate professor of applied linguistics and a certified IELTS speaking examiner. She is acknowledged for her interdisciplinary scholarship at the juncture of multimodal critical discourse analysis and American culture and media studies. Her teaching and research are centered around the critical study of motivational speeches, digital narratives, musical numbers, military-themed video games, political memes, National Geographic feature articles, op-eds in American newspapers, the aesthetics of forensic crime drama series, and post-human representation in the sci-fi or films. Thank you for being here, Dr. Nashwa. You can start now. Just a reminder, could you please have at least 5 to 7 minutes for the Q&A?
Yes.
And I would like to remind the audience to kindly post the questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat box, so that we can I can ask the presenter to address the questions at the end. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the nice introduction.
Dr. Nashwa, I'm sorry, can you just slideshow?
Okay, I will slideshow.
Yeah,
slideshow. Okay, is it visible now?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, now basically this study is on TED Talks, and it's part of a longitudinal study I've already embarked on 2 years ago. I've been working extensively on TED Talks to pinpoint all the rhetorical strategies and the semi-discursive style that TED Talks are characterized by. So let me first start with the title of this paper: Are TED Talks catalysts for teaching persuasive academic writing skills in higher education? Well, yes, they are. And I'll show you how they can be used effectively in writing classrooms. What I basically did was a semi-discursive approach. What I followed was, my approach was a semi-discursive one, and I basically analyzed the audience design and the communication accommodation strategies that are pursued in these diverse talks that basically address science popularizing discourse. So let me just start first with what digital stories are all about, because what TED Talks are, what are they? They are basically digital stories. So a digital story is a unique, non-linear narrative genre in which storytellers utilize new media technology to produce short personal narratives using high quality sound and images. It's basically short, not that long. It's personalized to a great extent, and it depends highly on multiple semiotic resources to drive the message across to multiple audiences. So what are the basic elements of a digital story? All digital stories have a point of view. The perspective of the author is clear. You can get it clearly from the story that you get to listen to. There is normally a dramatic question which sets up tension and captivates the audience. There is so much emotional content. The authorial voice is very clear, and it's, again, emblematic of the emotional content. The soundtrack, sometimes you could find some soundtrack or musical background if you're lucky, but not in many of the TED Talks you get to see that. It's economical, it's not that long, and the rhythm of the story is crucial to communicate the message behind it. So these are the 7 main elements of a digital story. What I did with my students was, what I normally do with my students is engage them in creating digital stories. They are exposed to the 7 elements, and they are encouraged to follow them in creating digital content. I've done that, by the way, in not only in writing classes, but also in media classrooms. I've been teaching grammar and phonetics for our media students in the College of Language and Communication, and they did their best to create digital stories, motivational stories, using the grammatical content and different phonetic aspects or features they've been exposed to throughout the whole semester. So digital stories can be employed not only in writing classrooms, but also in grammar and phonetics classrooms. I did my very initial study on Jay Shetty, a motivational speaker, and I was doing my best to teach students how to create a motivational content, how to write motivational content, which is very important because this took us to the next level, how to write public speeches or how to write speeches in general, not only the public speeches or the political speeches that are presented or delivered by presidents and politicians. Well, let me first walk you through TED Talks because I believe that most of us know what TED Talks are all about. TED Talks are common and we all use them in our classrooms. I'm not sure if you have done that already, but TED Talks popularize science at heart. Not all TED Talks are science oriented, but most of them are about science communication. So I'm not sure if you know what science popularizing discourse is, so let me give you just a brief idea of what science popularizing discourse is. Science popularizing discourse is a social phenomenon, and it's informed by journalism. It has a lot of editorial practices and discursive strategies employed to frame the scientific content. And for us as teachers, we have to make sure that we expose our students to these different editorial practices and discursive strategies in order for them to communicate messages properly. Popularization has been examined from multiple standpoints. Actually, it has been examined from discursive and rhetorical standpoints. And you will find most of the scholarly works to date focus on how personalized the narratives are, the dramatized sound bites, the idioms, the metaphors, the imagery, the evaluative language, the newsworthiness, and the stylistic devices that are employed by speakers when they communicate their messages to appeal to different audiences. So as a multimodal scholar, I mainly focus on the semi-discursive features or the semi-discursive strategies that are employed by speakers in this type of content, the digital stories, and one of them is TED Talk. So what is the aim of the study? The aim of the study was to pinpoint all the rhetorical strategies that TED organizers and inspirational speakers use to leverage the power of the platform to create transformational experiences, modern worldviews, and paradigm shifts for the millennial consumers who engage with the talks. This was the broad aim of the study. Now, what I did was a quasi-experimental study, and my aim was to pinpoint the strategies that I told you beforehand. So I employed some tools from different theories. One of the theories is communication accommodation theory. Probably you've heard about it. It's a communication theory, but it has been used by linguists and applied linguists in sociolinguistic research to pinpoint the strategies speakers follow when they are communicating persuasive discourse. So basically, CAT or communication accommodation theory is about 5 main strategies that speakers employ to converge, to show how cooperative they are in discourse. And these are approximation, interpretability, interpersonal control, discourse management, and emotional expression. It would take us a long while to explain each of them, but briefly, all of them relate to how cooperative you are in communicating the content, the scientific content you are planning to do through your TED Talk. Part of the study, part of the findings of the study was to pinpoint the rhetorical strategies employed in TED Talk. And in this case, we worked on the rhetorical strategies that are related to Aristotle's modes of persuasion. And I'm sure that some of us are familiarized with Aristotle's triangle of persuasion, rhetorical appeals. We call them sometimes as such: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos has to do with the credibility, has to do with ethics, how credible you are as the persuader, the speaker who delivers the information or the scientific content. Pathos has to do with emotion. It's how we convince the audience of a specific argument by creating an emotional response in our convincing story. And logos has to do with logic. It's how we persuade an audience with reason, facts, and figures. So what we basically figured out is that in most TED Talks, speakers not only use multimodal features or multimodal strategies, they also focus on the ethos, pathos, and logos in the TED Talks to make their talks more appealing and more convincing to audiences. So what are the main strategies that are employed in pathos to communicate pathos? Specific themes and points, storytelling, visual images, personal delivery techniques, with special focus on the physical position on stage, pace, tone, and volume, humor, analogies, and metaphors. So I'll show you some examples now from the TED Talks that we use in our writing classes with our students to show them the types of the different strategies that are used in order for them to keep in mind when they start writing motivational content. Some of the examples are taken from different talks. I think I put like 5 here from the same talk. I grew up to study the brain because I have a brother who has been diagnosed with a brain disorder, schizophrenia, and as a sister and a scientist, I wanted to understand why. Well, she is delivering the story in terms of points, and she had a specific theme. The whole talk revolves around the problem that her brother is suffering from, a brain disorder. For those of you who understand computers, our right hemisphere functions like a parallel processor, while our left hemisphere functions like a serial processor. Analogies, metaphors are used excessively in TED Talks to communicate, again, messages or scientific content. On the morning of the stroke, I woke up to a pounding pain behind my left eye, and it was the kind of pain, caustic pain that you get when you bite an ice cream, into ice cream. It's, again, the storytelling technique that speakers typically follow when they are presenting scientific content. Let's begin with a story. Once upon a time, it's another example for storytelling. Then all of a sudden, my left hemisphere comes back online. It says to me, hey, we got a problem, we got to get some help. And of course, this cracks some laughter at the audience side. So all of these are different techniques that are typically used in creating scientific content for a TED Talk to, again, appeal to the pathos of the audiences. The second thing was ethos. How is ethos created in the scientific content that speakers produce? They do that typically by direct engagement with them through personal questions. They personalize the discourse at some point. They focus on the positive and negative evaluative adjectives to pinpoint what is positive or negative about the issue they are raising in this specific talk. They tend to focus more on how trustworthy they are, how similar their situation is to the audiences, rather than they focus on authority and reputation. Let me give you also some examples here. The first one, for the first time in 3 decades into this epidemic, we have a real chance to come to grips with HIV. But in order to do that, we need to tackle an epidemic of reality bad law, really bad law. So these are some examples. I don't want to be long here. So these are some examples of how they engage with the audience and make them feel like we're all on the same page. You're not alone. We've all been suffering from some bad laws regarding HIV and so on. Logos, how is logos, which is appeal to logic, how is it created in the scientific content that they produce? They depend heavily on exemplification, metaphorical language, and the use of visuals. Some examples here. You can find, for example, very good national laws, and yet there is also customary and religious law, which have impact on women's daily life, particularly as they are related to marriage and inheritance. This is, again, exemplification. Metaphorical language. So based on all this recommendations, it's not rocket science here. We need to remove immune from prosecution for rape in particular when the perpetrator is an intimate partner. We need to work with communities to enforce that law, and part of that working with communities is engaging custodians of religion, religious and customary law. Of course, they present visual images along with the recommendation that they are making. So the use of visual images is critical here. Now, before I move on to this, let me tell you what we actually do with our students with these TED Talks. We start with analyzing the TED Talks with our students, trying to pinpoint these different features, what makes ethos, pathos, and logos clear, what are the different strategies that the writers of these TED Talks focus on, what are the examples they can detect from the different videos we show them. And from that point, we ask them to create motivational content on a topic of their own choice. It can be on architecture, it can be on anything, any topic of their own choice. It doesn't have to be only science related. So the key findings of this study is, that several audience engagement strategies are heavily employed in TED Talks. All of them relate to proximity. They have to be very proximal to the audiences In what sense? They have to appeal to the ethos, pathos, and logos in order for them to make the scientific content popularized. So proximity here is in terms of organization, how structured the TED Talk is, how the argument is structured, how credible they are, what their stance is, and how engaged the readers are. The different rhetorical appeals that are used in the different TED Talks we analyze are mainly manipulated to popularize science among the public, impact audience response to the mediated messages, position the academic and non-academic presenters as avid practitioners in today's world practices, and establish solidarity with the online communities. And these are the basic findings that we shared with our students to make them clear in order for them to keep in mind when they start writing scientific content for motivational speeches. The pedagogical implications are the study.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Nashwa, you have 5 more minutes.
Okay, I'm about to finalize. So what the study underscores here is that there are so many affordances of this hybrid genre, especially that the TED Talk is not only multimodal in nature, but it offers a lot of sociological, psychoanalytical, and rhetorical implications that we have to keep in mind when we are using them as catalysts for social change in our writing classrooms. I'm done, and if you have any questions, I'm ready.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any question, could you please post it in the Q&A box so that Dr. Nashwa can address them? Okay. Dr. Nashwa, I use TED Talks because I teach listening and speaking. I use TED Talks sometimes in my class. So as to teach writing, what are some of the challenges you come across?
Some of the challenges, well, one of the main challenges is they reject the idea that they are using a video material to write, or they have to go through a video material to identify the rhetorical strategies employed by the speaker in order for them to use them in the writing. This is one of the challenges we used to face with our students in the Arab Academy because they find it a bit difficult for them. At times, some of them find it not relevant. They feel like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing something like taking something from a video material and putting it into practice in a writing one? They don't see the relationship. But what TED Talks are all about, they're about science discourse and how popularized they are. So we need to teach our students at some point how to write proper scientific discourse that is persuasive in nature. And in that sense, they have to employ the same strategies that are used by speakers in the TED Talks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's a question from Ms. Noor Shire. Looking at your university, a scientific and maritime academy, do you teach ESP specifically in the writing class?
We do. All our courses in the languages department, all of them are ESP in nature. They are all ESP courses. So in our ESP classrooms, we dedicate one part of the writing section to scientific discourse, how to write proper scientific discourse, and we basically focus on motivational and persuasive ones.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Could you please post them in the Q&A box? Okay, we have another question here. Can you give a few examples of scientific writing that your students produce after analyzing TED Talks?
Some of the examples are, they do write a motivational talk on how important a special treatment is. Some of them are in the pharmacy. I'm not sure if you're familiarized with the different colleges we have in the Arab Academy, but there are Faculty of Pharmacy, Faculty of Dentistry, Faculty of Medicine, Artificial Intelligence, and different colleges. So typically, we would relate this type of writing to their own major. So they would write a persuasive piece of talk. They would write a persuasive content that is based on how artificial intelligence or how the artificial eye is important nowadays, how artificial arm is being produced, how different robots are used in the higher education among students. So they create the content they want, but they have to bear in mind that they need to be persuasive and appealing to different sectors of the audience. And in that case, they have to attend to the ethos, pathos, and logos that I stressed in this PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. Okay, I think there is one more question. Have you tried to move written work to oral performance? This is from Mr. Abdul Aziz.
I couldn't hear you.
Okay. Mr. Abdul Aziz has a question. He says, have you tried to move written work to oral performance?
Well, they have. They do create the content to be created, to be put in the format of a digital story. So it's not only put on paper. This material has to turn into a TED Talk, like as if they are creating a content for the TED Talk. So they would typically create it as a digital story. So they are writing the content, the scientific content, and they are turning it into a digital story. Some of the digital stories were very successful. Some of the digital stories were very successful. Some of them maintained the 7 elements that I talked about earlier in the slideshow, the 7 elements a digital story should have. And some of them could not really, they didn't have all the facilities that would help them create a fully developed one that attends to the 7 elements. So some of them let go of the musical aspect or the soundtrack aspect, but they focused on the emotional content, how credible their information is. They attended to the ethos, pathos, and logos again.
Okay. Is there any specific platform you use for uploading digital stories?
No, they can do that with very simple media movie creators. Very simple platforms can be used for that. They don't have to do something very sophisticated. We do have studios and we have very advanced labs that would help students do that. But my point was to help them create their own visual content with the least affordable media.
Okay, so how do you address students who are at a lower level? How would you have them get involved in this kind of an approach?
You can just be very selective. You can get some TED Talks that are quite simplified in nature, because I'm sure that you've been exposed to TED Talks several times and some of them are not that sophisticated. So you can get them very simple ones, not that long, like a short or a brief one, or just a minute or 2 of a long TED Talk. And they start working on analyzing it to figure out the different rhetorical strategies employed by this specific speaker, whether this speaker is specialized or not.
Okay, I have one more question from Fazila. And she says, wouldn't their writing be more informal in comparison to formal academic writing?
They don't write informal. They don't produce informal. They don't produce informal persuasive texts. So basically, we focus on formal language because you are communicating science content. And it will be very hard to communicate such type of discourse using colloquial or informal language.
Okay. Thank you so much. I don't think that, let's just give me 1 second. Are there any more questions? Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Nashfa, for your very creative and innovative approach of using TED Talks for teaching persuasive writing. You have really enriched our third theme, which is technology. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
And for being here in the forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Have a great day. Okay, are we ready with the next? Okay. All right. Are we ready with the next speaker, Ms. Baram?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Baram, could you please share your screen with us so that we can start the recording?
Sure.
Okay. Yes, perhaps on the slideshow. So that we
Yes.
can-
1 second.
Okay, ladies and
Would I be
gentlemen.
able to do the entire screen or just?
I think entire screen would be nice
Yeah,
if you can
I'm gonna
on
try
the
to do that.
slideshow.
Oh no,
I
I
think
mean my
total.
desktop, the entire desktop. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Ms. Maram, for being here. And this is our second talk presentation related to our theme technology. And we have Ms. Maram with us now. Ms. Maram is a linguistics instructor in the Linguistics and Translation Department at PSU. She's earned her MA in Literary Linguistics from the University of Nottingham and is interested in research in discourse, pragmatics, stylistics, and psycholinguistics and sociolinguistics. She has experience teaching ESL, college level writing courses, literature courses, and communication courses. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Ms. Maram. You can begin now, and you can leave the last, you can have 5 to 7 minutes for Q&A. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions while Ms. Maram is going presenting, please leave your questions in the Q&A box so that I can ask Ms. Maram to address them at the end of the talk. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Fawzi. I appreciate the introduction. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. We've arrived to the end of, inshallah, a very enriching day. What I'm going to be talking about is hopefully going to be short and sweet. It's something that is practical. I'm just going to give you a couple of tips and tricks on how to implement this in class. Of course, if you have any questions, if we aren't able to get to all the questions, you can email me. If you face any issues trying to sort of apply this in your courses or in your classes, of course, I'll be happy or more than happy to help. So I'm going to be talking about using timers in writing courses. Of course, you can use timers in any course, but this is when I initially started to use a timer. One of the things that was difficult for me was being able to manage my time well. And so when I noticed that this was a weakness that I had, that I would either disregard the time that I gave the students, I would forget about it, or I would have forgotten to look at the clock when I set the time, and it would just throw off the entire flow of the class, and it would end up in having me delay a topic into the next day, and it just caused just sort of confusion when I wanted to get something across to the students, or when I wanted to segue smoothly from one activity to another. I found that because I wasn't managing my time well, I wasn't able to successfully, get the point across to the students or get them to produce the way that I wanted them to produce. So that led me to doing a bit of action research. And I looked into a couple of issues, but one of them being managing time, especially in a writing course, because it involves a lot of practical work. It involves a lot of the students being the people that are producing and not just me. So I'm going to be going through that very, very briefly. Then we're going to be talking about locating and downloading the timers. I'm hoping I can share my entire desktop to show you the websites that I use, but we'll get to that, inshallah. Next, about embedding the actual timers. So different techniques that you can use, allocating time to the different activities or the different portions of an essay. Of course, this is something that is subjective. You need to just develop or find what works for you and what works for that specific section that you're teaching or that course that you're teaching. And then I'm going to be talking about the importance of practice, because this will tie into the use of the timer, and it'll make it, or it'll have the benefit of getting your students to be able to respond to the timer very well, inshallah, in class. So as I mentioned, one of my weaknesses was managing time well, and making sure that when I set a time for an activity, I actually committed to it and I stuck to it. It wasn't fair for me to say to the students, you have 5 minutes to do such and such, but then I would forget what time I started, and then I would just disregard that time, and then they didn't have enough time to work on the activity. Or sometimes I would give them too much time because I wanted them to complete the activity, and I didn't want to just go through the answers with the 2 students that were able to complete. So managing my time was a weakness that I had. And then in addition to that, having students that aren't able to produce a piece of writing on their own as frequently as you would want them to, or even coming up with ideas as much as you wanted them to, those two together did not work. So I needed to figure out a way to keep things keep the task at hand in terms of knowing what we're doing. This is the activity, and this is the time that we have for the activity. So for a writing course specifically, in this section that I was doing the action research in, the students weren't completing their essays on time. So the way that we give the assignments in our courses in PSU is we try to get them to finish the work in class as much as we can, rather than just doing it at home. So they weren't completing their essays on time. This caused a delay in the syllabus. And especially if you're teaching this course where your section is not the only section and you need to keep up with your colleagues because there's a unified exam and all of that, I needed to make sure that I was able to stick to the schedule. A couple of things went into this. The brainstorming stage was just taking too long. Having the students actually come up with ideas. There are a number of issues here. It could have just been that some of the topics weren't relatable, which is something else that we're going to get to. They didn't feel any pressure to finish. So they didn't feel like they needed to finish in that specific class. They thought, you know what, we'll be able to complete it during the next class. There wasn't any pressure. Excuse me. And then another thing that I always heard from my students was, well, Miss, we don't know what to write, or we don't have any ideas. We don't know anything about the topic. So this was a struggle. So I needed to figure out how to address these issues by using this timer technique, and was it going to address these issues or not? So mimicking exam conditions was one of the solutions. By telling them we have this time to work on this part, and seeing if they were able to produce within that time limit was a good way for me to start addressing these weaknesses or these issues that I had in my course. So I went and I started thinking, well, should I do, a manual timer? Because I know that's something that people do in their PowerPoints, but that just took too long. So in terms of locating and downloading timers, you can easily locate timers on YouTube. Go to YouTube, quickly do a search. Quickly do a search with the time limit that you want, be it 5, 7, 10, 20, an hour, whatever it may be. And you're going to find a multitude of videos with different backgrounds, different background music. And I use music very lightly here. A lot of these videos have just sounds. So like a bell, for example, something that's very calming. So it's sort of like introducing another element to try to improve the productivity or the level of productivity that my students had. So introducing this idea of white noise. So going on YouTube is the easiest, and I would just highly recommend just starting off with that and using that. Downloading, this is something that I personally do because I don't trust technology to work on the day that I need it. So I'd rather just download the video and have it on a USB drive or my hard drive, and then pull it out whenever I need it. And more often than not, I would just put it in the presentation or the PowerPoint. One thing that I like is I like having everything in one place. I don't want to have to go to different websites. I'm going to lose track of what website we're on, that we need to go back to the presentation, and so on and so forth. So I try to download things and keep them or embed them within my PowerPoint presentations as often as possible. It's just easier and more convenient for me personally, because I could be a forgetful person at times. I might forget to go back to a website that I need or whatever it might be. So like I said, YouTube, and then you can do a quick search. So I'm going to show you one technique here. So if you're using something like Microsoft PowerPoint, or if you're using Keynote, which is what I'm using here, you can do a quick search and you can embed a video. So if you operate off of a Mac, you can easily click on Media, Web Video, and then you can input the actual video that you want to use. So I have one open on my desktop. I'm just going to copy the title or the URL address. I'll insert it here, and then it'll insert it into the video for me. So this is the technique that I like to do. I like to embed everything within my presentations so that I don't have to go between different tabs and different browsers and whatnot. On Microsoft PowerPoint, you can do this. On Google Doc, you can do this. A friend of mine shared the technique. If you go to Google Drive, and then you just create a new Google Doc, you can do the same technique by adding a video. So if you just insert video, same thing, put the URL, or on Google Docs, it actually allows you to search for the video. So here, since you have to actually insert the URL, the benefit of Google Doc is you can write, for example, 5-minute timer, and it'll show up. I'd like to show it to you, but it's on my entire screen. Let me see if I can exit here just so that I can show you what it looks like. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay, so if you're using Google Docs, easiest thing is to go to, let's see, insert, video, and then you can do the same thing here. So I can write 10-minute timer. If I'm looking on for a video on a specific topic, whatever it might be, this is one of the easiest ways that you can do it as well. Click select, and then it's going to insert it within your slides. So as much as possible, I like to insert things in the presentations. It just honestly, it just helps with the flow of the class, and it makes things just easier for you to be able to keep track of where you are and what you're doing with your students. So this is another technique. Downloading, this is a website that I found that is very helpful. So I would, again, just insert the URL here. And then it prepares your download. You're going to click on, whatever format you want, and then you can download it onto your computer, transfer it to a USB drive or a hard drive, put it in your Google Drive. Since it's a short video, it wouldn't take that much space. And then you can have it there at the tip of your fingers whenever you need it, regardless of what class you're teaching, whether it's a writing course or if it's a different course. So these are the two sort of strategies that you can follow in order to embed within your actual PowerPoint presentations. Again, just to make the course a bit, or the presentation a bit smooth, or the lesson smooth when you're moving back and forth between topics or between activities. So downloading and inserting the URL are very helpful. And like I said, if you have any questions about sort of the technical issues, I'm more than happy to help you out. Just send me an email and I'll walk you through it. So these are some of the timers that I like to use. Another thing that I focus on is I don't always want to use a timer that's kind of straightforward like this one here. I like timers with backgrounds. Again, the more I can create sort of like a soothing environment in the classroom so that students are able to produce calmly in a good environment that is going to motivate them to come up with ideas or motivate a discussion, whatever it may be, it's something that I look forward to. Finding something that will help sort of ease their tension, especially in a writing course. Students are very stressed out. They think writing is something that they're never going to be able to do if they're trying to write in a language that isn't in their first language. I mean, they even struggle in their first language. So when you consider that being an issue that they already have, having them write in a second language is also a feat and a challenge for them. So the more I can make the classroom conducive, and more I can create an environment that is conducive to them producing and coming up with ideas, the more I'm going to try to do that for my students. So I, consider the background, I consider the sounds. So like I said, I try to play something with very soft background music. It's not going to be something that's going to be pumping loud. It's going to be very, very low, but just to channel their thoughts and kind of block out any other type of thinking that they're trying to do at the time. I want them to just hone in on the task at hand. So I try to find a timer that is aesthetically pleasing, auditorily pleasing as well, and then something that just is comfortable for the students, and it's not something that'll freak them out. This brings me to another piece of advice. I mistakenly, at the beginning when I was doing this, I downloaded a timer that I hadn't watched completely through and through. And unfortunately, at the end of that timer, there's like a huge or loud siren that was ringing. So just be aware of that. You don't want to freak your students out. You don't want to cause them to be stressed out. So make sure you are very careful in your selection of videos or selection of timers. So these are some of the sounds. That was just a couple of them playing at the same time, but find something that is soothing. Next, we're going to be talking about allocating time. This is honestly something that is going to be completely up to you. You have to figure out what works for you. I can't give you a set time that works for a set, part of the essay or a set activity. It just whatever works with the level of the batch that you get during that any given semester, any given course. You just need to, fine tune it until you figure out what works for them. So give them leeway at the beginning, give them more time, and then slowly maybe reduce that time until they get to a reasonable amount of time. I'm not asking for them to, by the end of the semester, be able to produce in 2 minutes. That's unreasonable. I want to give them small achievable goals. And so I keep that in mind when I allocate or when I designate a specific number or time for a specific activity. So what worked for me for this section that I was teaching at the time was we would either do a 5-minute brainstorming session or a 10-minute brainstorming session. Again, it wouldn't be something, I wouldn't just say, okay, yalla, brainstorm. I would be careful and I would try to be as specific as I can. So I would say, brainstorm, for example, just a subtopic or subtopics on such and such. Or I would say brainstorm a supporting detail or 2 supporting details on one of your subtopics. Because if you give them sort of leeway to do what they want, a lot of students don't like that. And I thought they would. I thought they would want freedom, but they want guidance and they want you to tell them specifically, well, you know what, in this time, in this moment, I need you to focus on this goal and give them that goal and make it clear and just help sort of scaffold the writing process that way. Again, a 10 or a 15-minute intro. So I would choose either 10 or 15. And all of these times, they could be arbitrary, just according to the length of your course as well. So figure out how long you have, how long you need, how long do you give your students to work on any given assignment. So if it's a 3-week writing unit, 2-week writing unit, 1, 5, whatever it may be, and then plan accordingly. And then I would reduce where I found necessary. I would designate more time for portions of the essay that they needed more time in. So I would generally be able to freely take time from the brainstorming session, the intro, and the conclusion. And I would be able to take those minutes that I've sort of gained and put them into the time that I would give them for their body paragraphs. One thing that was really helpful was I got into the habit of getting students to brainstorm at the start of every class, brainstorming about anything. And specifically, I would want it to be topics that they could relate to. So I would ask them to write on a piece of paper, just a piece of scrap paper, ask them to fold it up, and I would keep them in a box. And then I would bring it to class. Again, I'm forgetful. Sometimes I would forget to bring it, but when I remember, I would bring it and I would ask one student to choose a piece of paper, whatever the topic is. I would ask them, okay, you have 3 to 5 minutes to give me one argument on this topic, for example, or you have 3 to 5 minutes to give me a research question that is suitable for this topic. Again, I would be specific. I wouldn't just say brainstorm. I would be specific in what it is that I want them to be able to do at that time. I give them a lot of graphic organizers. I'm a very visual person, but I'm aware that there are different learning styles, and I want students to be aware of that as well. So what works for me as a visually oriented person might not work for somebody else. So I give them what works for me, and I tell them, this is sort of, you can start off with this and then cater it to suit whatever learning style it is that you have. I tell them it's really important for them to be able to understand who they are as a person and then who they are as a student. How do you learn? How do you organize your notes? Figure out what works for you. And so we would use these graphic organizers during the brainstorming session so that they can keep track of all of the work that they're doing and all of, this using the timer business. What is it going to benefit me with? Well, at the end of the semester, you're going to see hopefully an improvement in the way that you come up with your ideas, the types of ideas, the number of ideas as well. And so being able to see some sort of concrete evidence of their progress is going to be very validating for them as students. This is a website that I found really useful. It's called mindmup.com. Literally, it's for mind maps. And so it helps students that are visually oriented to organize their thoughts, and they enjoy adding all of these different nodes and different bubbles. And so this is something that I constantly share. In my writing courses, especially, I'm like a broken record. I repeat these things over and over again because I want them to get into the habit of being organized and being able to sort of empty out everything that's in their heads on the paper so that they can look at what they know, what they don't know, And then this will help them choose, the different supporting evidence to support ideas that they authentically have, rather than just receiving the assignment guidelines, looking at the research question, and then immediately running online. So brainstorming is really important. And I would have students just give me topics that are relatable to them. This is another issue that we have in writing. There are a lot of issues that I had to address, but giving them topics that they thought were interesting and topics that they could write about. Because I'm sure you guys have had the same, where students say, well, this is not something I know about. It's not something I'm interested in. It's not something I ever thought about. And because they have that attitude on that topic, that could lead them to not producing in that course or in that class that I wanted them to just simply brainstorm in. So these are all issues that you have to consider when you are using, or when you're trying to get your students to produce in a writing course. So I would remind them of, these sort of having a graphic organizer and using mind maps or whatever it may be. And then I would introduce the timer. So for any given section of the essay, I would give tips, and then I would put the timer right after it. Again, for the intro, I would do the same thing. I would remind them what they needed to include in their introduction, and then I would start the timer. What I mistakenly used to do in the beginning is I would be the one who would be reminding them of what it is that an introduction has to have. What does the linking sentence do? What does the thesis statement do? What are the components? And then I thought, wait, why am I repeating these over and over again? They need to tell me. So at the start, or before I introduce the timer, I have them give me these bullet points. So, okay, how many introductions or what types of introductions do we have? What do you think you're going to use? All right, what your linking sentence? What does it have to do? What is the function of your linking sentence? Thesis statement, what are the different parts? And so I would elicit the answers from them rather than mistakenly repeating it over and over again. And honestly, the next class, even though I've repeated these points over and over again, the next class, it's as if I never said it, but it's because I kept doing the talking. So I needed to reduce the amount of time that I was talking, have them tell me what the important parts are to see if they really understood what goes into writing and what makes a piece of academic writing an actual piece of academic writing. So I would introduce tips, give them reminders, and then introduce the timers. Same thing with the body paragraph, tips and tricks, reminders, things that I wanted them to keep in mind, and then I would introduce the timers. Conclusion, same thing. I would do this for all sections. So having these sort of mental workouts, and I always use the analogy when I ask my students, if you were trying to get, six-pack abs, if you were trying to get the best biceps in the world, if you were trying to strengthen your core, what do you have to do? You have to work out. So why not afford your brain that same type of respect? Having it work out and not just belittling your mind and saying, well, I can't come up with ideas. Well, I can't do this and I can't do that, because they're very quick to do that. It's sort of like an escape route for them. So I tell them, no, just work it out as often as possible. And we're going to do this together. Why do I try to do it in class? Almost every class, at least, because I've given them the advice of, if you're sitting in the waiting room at the dentist's office, if you're sitting in the car, if you're at the traffic light, whatever it might be, try to figure out a topic and try to think of ideas to support an argument against something, or think of ideas, how to compare and contrast between two things, whatever it might be. So I always give them this feedback, and I tell them that I do this as well, just to keep my brain active. But I noticed that the only students that were taking that advice and actually doing it were the high achieving students, which is not a reach for anybody to believe. So I needed to do it in class to ensure that they're actually doing it, and so that I can guide them into how to do it. And then hopefully that'll motivate them to be brainstorming and doing these mental workouts on their own. So these are just a couple of things that I want you to keep in mind. Like I said, it's going to be very short and sweet. It's something that is practical. You just have to figure out how you want to designate the different times to the different sections, how you're going to organize it. Once you develop your own system, it's very easy for you to apply this to any other course as well. I do use this with my other courses, not just my writing courses. But I would highly recommend keeping everything in one area, just in one presentation, for example, embedding things as often as possible in your slides. Because having to, run back to the computer and go to a different link and click here, and sometimes you'll forget that you added a hyperlink. It was just too much for me personally. So I wanted everything to just be in the same place, and I wanted to be able to just segue from one activity to another or one topic to another without causing any sort of, or without cutting, any enjoyment that the students are having or any productivity that they're having by telling them, wait, I have to find the clip here, or I have to locate it in my hard drive, or, oh my God, the internet isn't working, I can't find the timer. And so just having everything in one place is something that I would highly recommend that you guys do. So that's about it for today. Thank you guys for listening. If anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer it.
Thank you so much, Maram. That was very, very informative, and I'm sure it's going to be really very helpful for the writing teachers to manage time in class. We are always we have time constraints, and we want the students to finish work on time. So we have a few questions here, and so there's Anita. She says, you can embed timers in Google Slides, but not in Google Docs.
Sorry, Google Slides. That's what I meant.
Slides, yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, Google
So
Slides.
there's another question from Nada, and she says, is there any research paper about how effective timers are in a writing class?
Very minimal. When I started doing this, I remember it was because I was working towards something else. And I was trying to see, is there any existing literature on it? I probably honestly only found one paper that addressed the issue. One paper on timers and one paper on the benefits of having white noise or background sounds or music in your class while your students are trying to produce. So I think it was one for each.
And Noor Shaya says, did I miss on your findings of your action research?
Oh, sorry. Yes, the students, I mean, for them, everybody was able to produce. I had a lot of students, especially one student that literally would not have anything down on her paper for that entire class, because she just couldn't get over the hump of trying to get an idea out, and she wasn't able to organize her thoughts. So by the end, having everybody consistently practice and use the timer, everybody was able to produce a complete essay by the end of a class, any given class. And then most importantly, there was a benefit or there was an improvement from their midterms where they performed poorly, and then their final exams where they did improve. It was a drastic improvement for that course, and I was really happy. And that period between the midterm and the final was about 6 or 7 weeks, and they were able to improve in that time.
Okay, Ms. Karen here says this timing method can also work for speaking practice. There's another question from Nada, and she says it's about accuracy getting worse due to stress of short time.
Sorry,
does accuracy get worse because of the stress of the timer?
No, because it no longer
is it causing stress and affecting accuracy?
So in the beginning, it's stressful because you're mimicking exam conditions, to be honest. That's exactly what it is. But later, when they started getting used to constantly having this timer on, it wasn't a big deal for them. It literally didn't mean anything. We have a timer. Okay, that's just going to let us know when we're going to move on to the next stage. That was the attitude. It was no longer about, oh my God, I have 10 minutes to do this. It was like, oh my God, or not, oh my God. It was okay, I have 10 minutes to move on to the next stage. So their perception of it was different.
Okay. I have another question here from Shazia, Ms. Shazia, and she says, what about slow writers? Do they get an extension while the others move on?
In the beginning, I allowed a couple of them. I only had a couple that were exceptionally slow. I would give them some time because they are working sort of at a bigger disadvantage than everybody else. I've viewed the other students produce. I know that they can produce, but these couple of students that I had that wouldn't produce, I allotted them a little bit more time, not too much, because I didn't want to have them use that as a convenient excuse. Well, miss, I'm a slow writer, I'm a bad writer, and have that be sort of like their get out of jail free card. I would give them in the beginning, but I wouldn't extend it past maybe the first week.
Okay, a similar question from Dr. Jamal, somewhat similar, and he says, do you think weak writers may feel intimidated?
Yes, it's a typical human behavior. They're definitely going to feel intimidated, but it definitely, it's important, and this, which is why I was talking about making the environment conducive. Take out the stress of, having to come up with an idea, change the perception. It's not the fact that you have to come up with an idea to save your life. No, I just have 5 minutes to figure out what I have. Whatever comes out is what you need to use. So I wouldn't allow them to have to feel like they needed to go back to their brainstorming session and add more ideas. No, just work with what you have. I wasn't accepting perfection, and I made that clear to them. I don't want you to be perfect. I want you to produce. It's something that I would always say to my students. I do not want perfection. I want production, and that's it.
Okay. Mr. Rawan says here, thank you, Ms. Maram. This technique is very helpful. I attended a workshop you had a few years ago on the use of timers, and my classes are no longer the same. A world of difference, to be honest. But she has a question as well. She said, do you survey the students from their perspective? Do they notice a difference in their performance with timers versus without?
Yes, alhamdulillah, they were very pleased because they didn't expect that of themselves. So it wasn't a survey per se. It was more kind of an interview style or a discussion group style where I asked them, well, what do you think? Are you okay with this technique? Do you think you can produce? What are your impressions? But doing check-ins is something that I started to do recently, where every several weeks, every 2 weeks, literally, I have for example, like a week 3 or a week 6 survey that I put up on our Moodle page, and I label it check-in or checkpoint. And so students would respond, giving me their feedback. So I know maybe I need to back off a little bit. Maybe I need to give, this technique a break this week, maybe start it next week, and then so on and so forth. But the one thing that I wouldn't sacrifice is the mental workouts at the beginning of the class. Those 3 to 5 minutes make a world of a difference, especially when I reiterate, whatever you're brainstorming now, you're not going to write about. As soon as you say that, they're going to sigh in relief. Just this issue of having to write an essay, that mountain they think that they can't climb. But when I tell them we're doing mental workouts on topics that you're not going to write about, they're more willing to just take my hand and go with me.
Okay. Nada has another question. She says she's asking you about the level of your students and the kind of essays you ask them to do.
When I first introduced this technique, I was teaching PYP 030. So in this course, they were just starting essay writing. Hadn't been introduced to essay writing before. Previously, what they were doing was mainly just working on paragraphs. So I started this technique with them, and that's what the action research was on. But then I applied it to ENG 101, what we have at PSU, which is an intensive writing course where they're writing, compare and contrast essays, argumentative essays, classification, process analysis. So I use this for them as well, and alhamdulillah, it yields the same results.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Noorshaya says, Nada says, so you focus more on fluency rather than accuracy while reviewing their work?
Yeah, definitely. Because like I said, this idea of being perfect and being 100% accurate freaked them out. It scared them. I needed them to know, I just need you to produce. That's my expectation of you. And then with the feedback that I give them, the feedback stage, of course, allows them time to work on editing and reviewing their work and their drafts, so that by the time they submit their final draft, there is an improvement. The thoughts might have been organized a little bit, but I needed that first draft to be completed at a specific time so that we could spend time doing either, teacher feedback or peer reviews. I hope that made sense. Okay, you're very welcome. Okay, so as I said, if you have any further questions, any issues with the technicalities of doing this, please send me an email. I'll be more than happy to help you out.
All right, so thank you very much, Maram, for this interesting talk. I've already added Ms. Maram's email in the chat box in case you'd like to ask her any questions. And finally, I would like really at the end of this outstanding forum, I would say, because of the excellent work of our distinguished speakers, I would like on behalf of everyone to really thank the speakers for their brilliant talks. I would like to thank all the attendees for honoring us with their presence and participation. I hope that you can follow the Twitter account of the Linguistics and Translation Department at Prince Sultan University, which is in the chat box, so that you can know about our upcoming events and activities and participate more. On behalf of the Linguistics and Translation Department staff, I wish you a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you greatly.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Dina.
Dr. Dina.